Good evening, and welcome back to Noctelle, where history unfolds quietly and the past comes alive in the calm of the night. Tonight, we journey back to the summer of 1943, a moment when the world witnessed what would become the largest land battle in human history, the Battle of Kursk. This was not just another military confrontation, but a massive and brutal clash between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, involving more than 2 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces. Yet within this enormous battle lies a strange and fascinating paradox. The Soviet Union suffered significantly greater losses in both men and equipment, in some estimates up to 6 times more than the Germans, and still, in the end, it was Germany that lost. This raises a powerful question. How can an army that loses more still emerge victorious? To understand this, we need to step back to the spring of 1943. At that time, Nazi Germany was facing a serious strategic crisis. After the devastating defeat at Stalingrad and the surrender of Axis forces in North Africa, Adolf Hitler and his generals knew they were no longer in control of the war as they once had been. Germany was fighting on multiple fronts, while British and American bombers struck German cities continuously, and the Allies were preparing to open a second front in Western Europe. In this difficult situation, Hitler became unusually cautious. He advised against large-scale operations in the East and instead preferred limited engagements designed to weaken the Red Army over time. His idea was that if the Western Allies failed in their invasion attempts, Germany could later focus its full strength against the Soviet Union. For the moment, however, survival and containment were the priority. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was growing stronger. By the spring of 1943, the Red Army had rebuilt its strength and now significantly outnumbered German forces on the Eastern Front. They had roughly twice the number of soldiers, far more tanks, and overwhelming artillery support. Soviet commanders were already planning large-scale offensives that aimed to push German forces westward and eventually break their hold on Eastern Europe. Between these two massive forces stood a key strategic location, a bulge in the front line centered around the city of Kursk. Though relatively small, this region became the focal point for both sides. Whoever controlled it would gain a major advantage, and both the Germans and the Soviets understood its importance. The Soviet High Command, known as the Stavka, correctly anticipated that Germany would attack this area. Instead of striking first, they chose a defensive strategy. They deployed powerful formations across the region and began constructing one of the most extensive defensive systems ever built. Kursk was transformed into a fortress with multiple defensive layers, thousands of kilometers of trenches, and nearly 1 million landmines. Civilian workers, many of them women, contributed massively to building these fortifications. The Germans, on the other hand, were preparing their own offensive, known as Operation Citadel. They planned to attack from both the north and the south, encircle Soviet forces, and destroy them in a decisive blow. Germany also introduced new heavy tanks like the Tiger, which had superior armor and firepower compared to most Soviet tanks. While these machines were feared, the Soviets adapted quickly, developing tactics to counter them by targeting weak points and using numerical advantage. However, one critical factor shaped the outcome of the battle before it even began. Time. Hitler delayed the offensive several times, waiting for reinforcements and reacting to concerns in other parts of the war, particularly in the Mediterranean. These delays proved costly. Every extra week allowed the Soviets to strengthen their defenses, lay more mines, dig deeper trenches, and prepare more thoroughly for the coming attack. By the time Operation Citadel finally began on July 5, 1943, the Germans were no longer attacking an unprepared enemy. Instead, they faced one of the most heavily fortified defensive systems in military history. At the start of the battle, German forces achieved some initial success. They broke through the first defensive lines and advanced into Soviet territory. However, progress quickly slowed. Each layer of defense became harder to penetrate, and German units faced constant resistance, heavy artillery fire, and devastating minefields. Every kilometer gained came at high cost. One of the most intense moments of the battle occurred near the village of Prokhorovka, where a massive tank engagement took place. The battlefield descended into chaos as tanks clashed at close range. Visibility was reduced by smoke and dust, and soldiers fought in brutal, close-quarters combat. Although Soviet forces suffered heavy losses, they managed to halt the German advance. Soon after, the strategic situation shifted dramatically. On July 12th, the Soviet Union launched a major counteroffensive known as Operation Kutuzov. This marked the beginning of a relentless push that forced German forces onto the defensive. Their offensive momentum was broken, and they could no longer sustain large-scale attacks. Despite their higher losses, the Soviets succeeded because of several key factors. Their deep defensive preparations absorbed the initial German assault. Their vast reserves allowed them to reinforce critical points, and their ability to transition quickly from defense to counterattack gave them a decisive advantage. Germany, despite having technologically superior tanks in some cases, could not overcome the Soviet numerical strength, preparation, and determination. The consequences of the Battle of Kursk were enormous. After this battle, Germany permanently lost the ability to launch major offensives on the Eastern Front. From that point onward, they were forced into a defensive position, attempting only to slow the Soviet advance. Meanwhile, the Red Army began pushing westward, advancing over 1,000 miles and eventually reaching the gates of Berlin. Kursk became a turning point not only in the war, but in world history. It demonstrated that Nazi Germany could be defeated in open battle, and it marked the beginning of an irreversible shift in momentum toward the Soviet Union and the Allies. But beyond strategy and numbers, it is important to remember the human cost. The battle resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties in just a few weeks. Behind every statistic was a person, a soldier with a life, a family, and a future that was lost. The scale of destruction and suffering serves as a powerful reminder of the true cost of war. The legacy of Kursk extends far beyond its immediate outcome. It showed the importance of preparation, intelligence, and strategic depth. It revealed the limits of technological superiority when faced with overwhelming numbers and strong defensive planning. It also highlighted how critical timing and decision-making can be in determining the outcome of a conflict. In the end, the Battle of Kursk stands as one of the most significant and influential battles in history. It marked the last major German offensive in the East and signaled the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. From that summer onward, the Soviet advance would continue steadily until the final battle in Berlin nearly 2 years later. Thank you very much for watching and for your continued support of our historical content. If you enjoyed this detailed story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to support us. Tell us in the comments, which historical battle or event would you like us to cover next? Would you like more World War II stories? Or something from a different era? And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from, which city or country. We'll see you in the next historical journey, here on Noctelle.